In 1885, Olivia Patterson stepped off a train in Willow Creek, Montana, her life's possessions packed in a single trunk. She had traveled over 2,000 miles from Boston to marry a man she'd never met, a man who took one look at her and decided she wasn't what he wanted. In the time when women had few options, Olivia found herself stranded in a frontier town where her silence was seen as a flaw rather than the result of trauma. But fate has a way of bringing people together who need each other most. This is the story of how a woman who barely spoke found her voice in the most unexpected place, with a man who couldn't hear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The February wind cut through Olivia Patterson's woolen coat as she descended from the train at Willow Creek Station. Her gloved fingers clutched the letter that had brought her to this remote corner of Montana territory. 6 months of correspondence with Walter Simmons had culminated in a proposal and a one-way ticket west. At 28, Olivia knew this might be her last chance at marriage and a family of her own. She scanned the platform, looking for the man she knew only from a small tintype photograph and flowery handwriting. Walter had described himself as a prosperous merchant with a 2-story home and a desire for a refined Eastern lady to bring culture to this growing settlement. And in her letters, Olivia had been honest about everything, except the fact that she rarely spoke. The typhoid fever that had claimed her parents and younger sister 5 years ago had left Olivia with a voice that emerged only in whispers, and sometimes not at all. A portly man in an ill-fitting suit approached, his eyes darting between Olivia and a photograph in his hand. "Miss Patterson?" he called out. Olivia nodded, forcing a small smile. Walter Simmons was not as handsome as his photograph suggested, but Olivia hadn't come for romance. She'd come for stability and a fresh start away from the pitying glances of Boston society. "I'm Walter. Welcome to Willow Creek." He made no move to take her trunk, instead studying her face with increasing disappointment. "You look older than your photograph." Olivia felt her cheeks flush. She opened her mouth to respond, but only a raspy whisper emerged. The journey was long. Walter's eyebrows shot up. "What's wrong with your voice?" She pulled a small slate and chalk from her reticule, tools she'd grown accustomed to using, and wrote, "Illness affected my voice. I can speak, but with difficulty." Walter read the slate, his frown deepening. "You didn't mention this in your letters." Olivia wrote again. "I expressed myself better in writing. I hope this won't be a problem." "Not a problem," Walter scoffed. "I run a store. I need a wife who can socialize, who can charm customers, not someone who has to write everything down like a schoolchild." The stares of curious onlookers burned into Olivia as she stood on the platform, humiliation washing over her. 6 days of travel, her life savings spent on the journey, and now she faced rejection before even leaving the station. "This won't do," Walter said, taking a step back. "I can't marry a woman who can't even greet customers properly. You misrepresented yourself, Miss Patterson." Olivia's hand trembled as she wrote, "I can work. I can help in other ways. I advertised for a wife." "Not a burden," Walter replied coldly. "The westbound train leaves tomorrow morning. I suggest you be on it." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Olivia standing alone beside her trunk, the wind whipping at her skirts and tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "Don't mind Walter Simmons," a voice said from behind her. "He's never been known for his kindness." Olivia turned to find an older woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. "I'm Martha Blackwood," the woman said. "I run the boarding house. Come along, dear. You'll need a place to stay tonight." Martha didn't wait for a response, simply signaling to a young boy to fetch Olivia's trunk. As they walked the muddy main street, Martha spoke matter-of-factly. "Walter Simmons has brought 3 mail-order brides to Willow Creek in the past 2 Years. None stayed longer than a week. The man's expectations are higher than the Montana sky, and his character lower than a snake's belly. Olivia pulled out her slate to respond, but Martha waved it away. No need for that right now. I can see. You're tired? We'll talk after you've had some rest and a hot meal. The boarding house was clean and warm, with simple furnishings and the smell of fresh bread in the air. Martha showed Olivia to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. Supper's at 6, Martha said. Rest now. Tomorrow's soon enough. To figure things out. Alone in the room, Olivia finally allowed her tears to fall. The reality of her situation crashed down upon her. Stranded in a frontier town, with barely enough money for a return ticket and nowhere to return to. She had sold her parents' house and most of their possessions to start this new life. Now, all she had was a trunk full of clothes too fine for a place like Willow Creek and the crushing weight of another failure. That evening at supper, Martha introduced Olivia to the other boarders. 2 teachers from the newly established school, a young lawyer and a widow who worked as the town's seamstress. When Martha explained Olivia's situation, the group exchanged knowing glances. Walter Simmons is a fool, declared one of the teachers, a forthright woman named Sarah. Any man who'd turn away a bride because she's quiet has never appreciated the value of peace and quiet. Olivia wrote on her slate, I have enough money for a ticket back east, but nothing waiting for me there. Can you sew? Asked the seamstress, Agnes Miller. Olivia nodded. Her needlework had always been excellent. I could use help in my shop, Agnes offered. At least until you decide what to do next. For the first time since arriving in Willow Creek, Olivia felt a flicker of hope. The next morning, rather than boarding the eastbound train, Olivia followed Agnes to a small shop off the main street. The bell above the door jangled as they entered a space filled with bolts of fabric, patterns, and half-finished garments. Most folks around here can't afford ready-made clothes, Agnes explained, and those who can still prefer custom work. With the town growing, I have more orders than I can handle. Olivia spent the day helping Agnes cut patterns and baste seams. Her precise stitches and eye for detail impressed the older woman, who smiled with approval. You have a gift, Olivia. Your hands speak for you. For 2 weeks, Olivia settled into a routine, working at the seamstress shop by day and returning to Martha's boarding house in the evening. She began to recognize the townspeople who came into the shop, though few made an effort to engage with the mute Eastern lady, as she heard herself described. It was during her 3rd week in Willow Creek that everything changed. Olivia was alone in the shop, Agnes having gone to deliver a completed dress, when the bell above the door announced a customer. She looked up to see a tall man in his mid-30s with broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin. His brown hair was a touch too long, and his clothes, while clean, showed signs of hard work. Olivia rose from her work table and nodded in greeting. The man didn't respond to her gesture, instead looking intently at her face. She reached for her slate and wrote, "How may I help you?" The man continued to stare, confusion crossing his features. Then, to Olivia's surprise, his hands began to move in deliberate gestures. She recognized it immediately as the manual alphabet she had learned during her own recovery, when doctors feared she might never speak again. The man was spelling words with his fingers. "I need shirt mended." He pointed to a tear on the sleeve of the shirt he was wearing, then made more hand gestures that Olivia didn't understand. Realization dawned on her. This man wasn't being rude, he was deaf. Olivia put down her slate and slowly fingerspelled in return, "I can fix it." The man's face transformed with a smile that reached his eyes. He quickly shrugged off his jacket and then, with no self-consciousness, removed his torn shirt, revealing an undershirt beneath. He handed the garment to Olivia, who felt a strange flutter in her chest at the unexpected interaction. She gestured for him to wait, and turned to examine the tear. It was a simple fix that would take only a few minutes. As she worked, she felt the man watching her, but the sensation wasn't uncomfortable, as it often was when others stared. When she finished, she handed the shirt back to him. He inspected her work with careful fingers before nodding in approval. From his pocket, he withdrew a few coins, but Olivia shook her head and wrote on her slate, "No charge for a small repair." The man frowned, clearly unwilling to accept charity. He put the coins on the counter anyway, then finger-spelled slowly, "Ethan James, ranch north of town." Olivia replied with her own name, both in fingerspelling and written on the slate. Ethan studied her face, then signed something she didn't understand. Seeing her confusion, he pointed to her slate, and she handed it to him. His handwriting was unexpectedly elegant as he wrote, "You read lips." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Olivia shook her head and wrote, "I can speak, but illness took most of my voice. I learned." Some fingerspelling then. Ethan read her words, then looked up with an expression that hit Olivia like a physical force. There was no pity in his eyes, only recognition, the gaze of someone who understood what it meant to navigate a world designed for others. He wrote on the slate, "Come to dinner at my ranch. Sunday. I'll send a wagon." The invitation was so unexpected that Olivia simply stared at him. Ethan tapped the slate, his expression questioning, waiting for her answer. Before she could respond, the shop door opened, and Agnes returned with Walter Simmons in tow. Walter stopped short at the sight of a shirtless man standing at the counter with Olivia. "What's going on here?" Walter demanded. Ethan, unaware of the question, calmly put his mended shirt back on. Walter strode forward, placing himself between Olivia and Ethan. "James, what are you doing harassing Miss Patterson?" Ethan, noticing Walter's aggressive stance, frowned in confusion. Agnes quickly intervened. "Mr. James needed a shirt mended, Walter. Nothing improper was happening." Walter turned to Olivia. "Is this true, or has the deaf rancher been bothering you?" The contempt in Walter's voice as he said "deaf rancher" sent a surge of anger through Olivia. She grabbed her slate and wrote in large, clear letters, "Mr. James has been a perfect gentleman." Unlike some in this town, Walter's face reddened as he read her words. "I see you've found a kindred spirit in the town misfit," he sneered. "How fitting." Ethan, watching their faces intently, seemed to understand the tension even without hearing the words. He straightened to his full height, several inches taller than Walter, and fixed the merchant with a hard stare that made the smaller man take a step back. Agnes stepped between them. "That's enough, Walter. You've said your piece. Now, I suggest you place your order or leave my shop." After Walter stormed out, Agnes turned to Olivia with concern. "Be careful with Ethan James, dear. He's a good man, but he lives alone for a reason. People here don't understand him, and they won't understand you spending time with him either." Olivia looked at Ethan, who was watching them closely, trying to follow the conversation through their expressions. There was something in his steady gaze that made her feel seen for the first time since arriving in Willow Creek. She picked up her slate and wrote her answer to his earlier invitation. "Sunday dinner. Yes." The smile that spread across Ethan's face was like sunrise breaking over. The Montana mountains, warm, genuine, and full of promise. In that moment, Olivia knew her journey to this remote frontier town might have a purpose after all. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze, unusual for early March in Montana territory. Olivia stood on the porch of Martha's boarding house dressed in her second-best dress, a practical navy blue wool with minimal embellishments. She'd spent the previous evening altering it to better suit the Western style she observed among the local women. "You look lovely," Martha said, coming to stand beside her. though I still think this outing is hasty. You barely know Ethan James. Olivia. I pulled out her slate. I feel comfortable with him. We understand each other. Martha sighed. That may be so, but remember, Ethan's ranch is 5 miles outside town. His nearest neighbor is the Dawson family, another mile beyond. If you need help, I'll be fine, Olivia wrote. Mr. James has been nothing but respectful. It's not just that. Martha lowered her voice. Ethan's been alone since his father died 3 years ago. Before that, it was just the two of them since he was 12. He didn't grow up around women, and with his condition... Olivia frowned and wrote, his deafness doesn't make him dangerous. Of course not, Martha backpedaled, but he's isolated himself. People talk. They say he's grown strange from living alone, that he's as wild as the wolves that roam his property. From down the street came the sound of wagon wheels on the packed dirt road. Olivia's heart quickened as she spotted Ethan handling the reins of a well-maintained wagon drawn by 2 chestnut horses. What struck her immediately was his transformation. Gone was the working ranch attire from their first meeting. Today, Ethan wore a clean white shirt under a dark vest, with his hair neatly combed and face freshly shaved. He looked almost handsome, in a rugged, weathered way that spoke of hard work and solitude. As the wagon pulled to a stop, Olivia descended the porch steps. Ethan jumped down and offered a small, uncertain smile. In his hand was a crude bouquet of early spring wildflowers. Martha followed Olivia down the steps. "Mr. James," she greeted, loudly, then caught herself and nodded instead. Ethan nodded back, before turning his attention to Olivia. He presented the flowers with a formal bow that seemed practiced, as though he'd rehearsed this moment. Olivia accepted them with a genuine smile, her eyes conveying her thanks. Ethan pointed to his wrist, where a watch might sit, then to the sky, indicating they should depart. After helping Olivia onto the wagon seat, Ethan exchanged a look with Martha that contained a silent promise. He would take care of her guest. "Have her back before dark," Martha instructed with exaggerated hand gestures. Ethan nodded solemnly before climbing up beside Olivia. As they left town behind, houses giving way to open prairie dotted with sagebrush and early wildflowers, Olivia felt a sense of liberation. The space between them on the wagon seat was small enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from Ethan's solid frame, yet he was careful not to crowd her. Olivia pulled out her slate and wrote, "Thank you for the invitation." Ethan glanced at her words, then signed something before remembering she didn't understand his gestures. He took the slate and wrote, "Thank you for accepting." Not many would. The simple honesty of his statement touched Olivia deeply. In just a few words, he had acknowledged their shared status as outsiders. The road gradually climbed into rolling hills covered with pines. Around a bend, Ethan's ranch came into view, a modest but well-maintained homestead nestled in a protected valley. A sturdy log house stood at the center, with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings arranged around it. A creek meandered across the property, and Olivia could see cattle grazing on the tender new grass of early spring. It wasn't the grand ranch of a cattle baron, but neither was it the primitive cabin she had feared. The house itself was larger than she expected, with glass windows that caught the midday sun and a stone chimney from which smoke gently curled. Ethan brought the wagon to a halt in front of the house and helped Olivia down. She noticed his hands were calloused but clean, his grip firm yet gentle. Up close, she could see flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, and the slight nervousness in his expression matched her own. He led her to the porch and held the door open. The interior surprised Olivia. It was simple but comfortable and notably clean. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with well-crafted wooden furniture arranged for conversation. Bookshelves lined another wall, unexpected. In a ranch house, especially one belonging to a deaf man. Ethan gestured for her to make herself comfortable while he disappeared into what must be the kitchen. Olivia wandered to the bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines of books, ranging from practical manuals on animal husbandry to classic literature. Many appeared well worn. She was examining a volume of Wordsworth's poetry when Ethan returned, with 2 glasses of lemonade. He watched her holding the book, and a question formed in his eyes. Olivia accepted the lemonade and wrote on her slate, "You enjoy poetry?" Ethan set his glass down to free his hands. He took the slate and wrote, "My father taught me to read when I was young. Books became my window to the world of sound." Olivia nodded in understanding. For her, writing had become her voice when speech failed her. "How long have you been deaf?" she wrote. "Since birth," he replied. Never heard a sound. This revelation surprised her. Ethan carried himself with such awareness of his surroundings that she had assumed he had lost his hearing later in life. "How do you manage the ranch alone?" she asked. Ethan's expression brightened. He gestured for her to follow him to the window, where he pointed to a young man working with horses in the corral. "Thomas Dawson, neighbor's son. Works for me 3 days a week. Today is a special occasion." He paused, then added, "Ranch was my grandfather's, then father's, now mine. 25 cattle, 12 horses, 100 acres. There was unmistakable pride in his written words, the satisfaction of a man who had preserved his family's legacy despite challenges. Ethan then led her to the kitchen, where the table was already set for their meal. A pot of stew simmered on the stove, filling the room with appetizing aromas. Olivia raised an eyebrow, impressed. Understanding her unasked question, Ethan wrote, "I cook for myself. Father taught me. Not fancy, but good." And it was. The stew contained tender beef, potatoes, carrots, and herbs that complemented each other perfectly. Fresh bread, clearly baked that morning, accompanied the meal. Olivia hadn't expected such domesticity from a bachelor rancher, especially one who lived so isolated from society. As they ate, they developed a rhythm of communication, passing the slate back and forth, with Olivia occasionally whispering words that Ethan would study her lips to understand. It was slow, deliberate conversation, but somehow more meaningful than the empty chatter Olivia had endured at Boston social gatherings. Ethan wrote about his daily life, rising before dawn to tend the animals, the seasonal cycles of ranch work, the quiet evenings spent reading by firelight. Olivia shared stories of Boston, her training as a seamstress in her father's tailor shop, and her love of creating beautiful things from fabric and thread. Neither mentioned their respective disabilities directly, yet they hovered in the background of every exchange, not as barriers, but as the very reason they could understand each other's experiences of isolation. After the meal, Ethan offered to show Olivia the rest of the property. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as they walked from the barn to the creek, Ethan pointing out his projects and plans for the ranch. His ambitions were modest but clear, expanding the herd gradually, improving the breeding stock, perhaps adding an orchard near the house. At the corral, Thomas Dawson tipped his hat to Olivia, his friendly smile revealing none of the wariness she typically encountered in town. "Miss Patterson," he greeted. "Mr. James has been looking forward to your visit all week. Cleaned the house twice over." Olivia smiled at this revelation, glancing at Ethan, who was focused on adjusting a strap on one of the horses and hadn't seen the exchange. "He's a good man," Thomas continued, lowering his voice. "Folks in town don't give him enough credit. Smartest rancher in the county, if you ask me. Got methods for raising cattle that others are just starting to figure out." Olivia nodded, wishing she could respond more fully. She pulled out her slate and wrote, "He seems very capable." "More than capable," Thomas affirmed. "My pa says if Ethan could hear, he'd be running the biggest ranch in the territory by now. As it is, he does more with these 100 acres than most do with 500. Ethan turned from the horse, catching them in conversation. His expression showed mild curiosity, but no suspicion. He trusted Thomas, Olivia realized, a luxury rarely afforded to those with disabilities in a world quick to take advantage of perceived weakness. As the afternoon waned, they returned to the house. Ethan built up the fire against the evening, chill, and offered coffee. While he prepared it, Olivia noticed a small table in the corner with various tools and what appeared to be clockwork mechanisms in different stages of repair. When Ethan returned, she pointed questioningly at the workbench. "I repair clocks and watches," he wrote. "People from town bring them. Good work for winter evenings." Olivia approached the table to examine his work more closely. The precision of the tiny gears and springs, laid out in careful order, spoke of patience and extraordinary attention to detail. "This is impressive," she wrote. "How did you learn?" "Father had a pocket watch that stopped. No money to fix it. Taught." "Myself, from a book." Olivia marveled at this revelation. The man before her had overcome not just deafness, but the prejudice and limitations others placed upon him through sheer determination and ingenuity. As the light began to fade, Ethan reluctantly wrote that they should start back to town. Martha's warning about returning before dark hung between them, unwritten but understood. The ride back was quiet, both lost in thought as the wagon trundled along the darkening road. Olivia found herself wishing the ranch were closer to town, that their day didn't have to end so soon. When they reached the boarding house, Ethan helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. In the golden light spilling from Martha's windows, his face showed a mixture of hope and resignation. He took her slate and wrote, "Thank you for coming. Best day in a long time." Olivia read his words and felt a warmth spread through her chest. She took back the slate and wrote, "When can I see you again?" The smile that transformed Ethan's face was answer enough, but he wrote anyway, "Market day, Thursday, meet at noon." Olivia nodded, then on impulse reached out and squeezed his hand. The simple gesture conveyed what neither her weak voice nor written words could fully express: connection, appreciation, understanding. From the porch, Martha cleared her throat pointedly. Ethan stepped back, tipping his hat to both women before climbing back onto his wagon. As he drove away, Olivia watched until the darkness swallowed the outline of the wagon and man. "Well," Martha said, her tone carefully neutral, "I see you've returned safely." Olivia nodded, her mind still at the ranch with its books and clocks, and the man who had created a life of dignity despite the world's dismissal. "Was it pleasant?" Martha asked, curiosity overcoming her earlier reservations. Olivia wrote on, her slate, "Very much so. He's kind and intelligent." Martha studied Olivia's face. "You're glowing, dear. I haven't seen you look so animated since you arrived." Inside, over tea, Martha's questions continued, each answered patiently by Olivia's chalk on slate. Yes, his house was clean and well kept. No, he hadn't been improper in any way. Yes, he cooked the meal himself. "Remarkable," Martha murmured. "Though I suppose when you live alone as he has, you learn to manage." Before retiring for the night, Olivia wrote one last message. "I'm meeting him again on Thursday." Martha's eyebrows rose, but she didn't object. "Just be careful, Olivia. Not of Ethan, I believe you when you say he's honorable, but this town can be cruel to those who don't fit their narrow expectations. They already whisper about the mute Eastern lady. If you align yourself with the deaf rancher, those whispers will grow louder." Olivia straightened her shoulders and wrote firmly, "Let them whisper. I've heard worse in Boston drawing rooms." That night, Olivia dreamed not of Boston's brick-lined streets or the life she'd left behind, but of open Montana skies and a ranch house filled with books. In her dream, she and Ethan sat by a fire, communicating, effortlessly without words or slate, just understanding, flowing between them like the creek that wound through his land. She woke before dawn, restless with new possibilities. For the first time since the fever that had taken her family and her voice, Olivia felt the stirrings of something like hope, not just for survival, but for a life with meaning. The week crawled by, each day at Agnes's shop stretching endlessly. As Olivia anticipated Thursday's meeting, she found herself watching the door whenever the bell jingled, hoping to see Ethan, though she knew he rarely came to town except on market days. Agnes noticed her distraction as Olivia pricked her finger, for the third time while hemming a dress. "You've got it bad, haven't you?" the seamstress asked with a knowing smile. Olivia felt heat rise to her cheeks as she shook her head in denial. "No use pretending with me, girl. I've seen that look before." Agnes sat down beside her. "Martha told me about your Sunday adventure. Said you came back looking happier than she'd ever seen you." Olivia busied herself with the hem, avoiding Agnes's gaze. "I think it's wonderful," Agnes continued, surprising Olivia. "This town needs more people willing to see beyond what's on the surface. And Ethan James deserves some happiness. That man's had more than his share of hardship." Olivia looked up questioningly. "You didn't know? His mother died in childbirth. Some say that's what caused his deafness, though doctors now say that's nonsense. His father raised him alone, taught him to read lips and use that hand language. Then when Ethan was 12, a horse kicked his father in the head. Didn't kill him outright, but he was never the same. Ethan cared for him for nearly 20 years before the old man passed. This new knowledge settled over Olivia like a mantle. She had sensed a deep well of strength in Ethan, but hadn't understood its source. His self-sufficiency wasn't just adaptation to deafness. It was born of necessity, of responsibilities shouldered far too young. "That ranch should have failed a dozen times over," Agnes continued. "But somehow Ethan kept it going, even when drought took half the cattle in the county too. Summers ago, he's got away with animals, like they understand him better than people do." When Thursday finally arrived, Olivia dressed with special care in a blue calico dress she'd made herself, with buttons of carved bone that complemented her golden brown hair. At precisely noon, she stood outside the general store, heart fluttering, against her ribs like a bird seeking freedom. The market day crowd bustled around her, farmers with produce, ranchers with goods to trade, townspeople taking advantage of the weekly gathering to socialize. Olivia stood apart, watching for the familiar figure of Ethan among the strangers. The clock on the mercantile wall showed 12:30 and still no sign of Ethan. Olivia shifted uneasily, ignoring the curious glances from passers-by. Perhaps he had changed his mind. Or worse, something had happened to him on the ranch, an accident with no one to hear his calls for help. Just as anxiety began to tighten her chest, Olivia spotted Walter Simmons approaching. His smile held none of the warmth she'd seen in Ethan's eyes. "Miss Patterson," he greeted with exaggerated volume, as though her voice affliction affected her hearing. "Waiting for someone?" Olivia gave a non-committal nod, hoping he would continue on his way. "If you're expecting James, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed." Walter's tone carried a note of satisfaction. "Sheriff Holt detained him at the livery stable. Seems there was some confusion about payment for feed." Alarm flashed through Olivia. She reached for her slate, but Walter continued before she could write. "Such a shame. The challenges of conducting business when one can't properly communicate." He shook his head in mock sympathy. "Perhaps this illustrates why certain arrangements are unwise." Olivia's chalk nearly snapped as she wrote, "Where is the livery? Stable?" Walter's smile faded. "Now, Miss Patterson, this is hardly a matter for a lady to involve herself in. The sheriff will sort it out." She brushed past him, slate clutched to her chest, and headed toward the far end of the main street where She recalled seeing the livery. Walter called after her, but she didn't turn back. The scene at the livery stable made her blood boil. Ethan stood in the center of a small crowd, his normally confident posture tense with frustration. Sheriff Holt, a stocky man with a handlebar mustache, was speaking loudly and slowly, exaggerating his mouth movements in a way that bordered on mockery. "I said, do you have a receipt?" the sheriff practically shouted. Ethan's hands moved rapidly in signs Olivia couldn't understand, his expression a mixture of anger and humiliation. The livery owner, a thin man with stooped shoulders, stood to the side, shaking his head. "I told him last month the price went up. Not my fault if he didn't understand." Olivia pushed through the onlookers until she stood at Ethan's side. His eyes widened in surprise, then softened with relief at the sight of her. She quickly wrote on her slate what happened. Ethan took the slate, his writing hurried. "Price changed. Livery says I owe more. Already paid what was agreed." Olivia turned to face the sheriff and livery owner. She wrote on her slate and held it up for all to see. "Mr. James cannot hear you." Shouting, "What exactly is the dispute?" The sheriff glanced at her words with obvious irritation. "This isn't your concern, miss." The livery owner was more forthcoming. "James has an account for horse feed. Prices went up 2 cents a pound last month due to the rail freight increases. Posted a notice right here on the door." He gestured to a weathered paper tacked beside the entrance. "He shorted me $3 on his last pickup." Olivia looked at Ethan, who was watching the exchange intently, trying to follow the conversation through expressions and gestures. She could see the frustration in the tight set of his jaw. She wrote on the slate and showed it to Ethan. "Did you know about the price increase?" He shook his head firmly, then took the slate. "Would have paid if I knew. Never seen notice, of course." He hadn't. A written notice would only work if someone brought it to his attention or if he happened to look directly at it. Olivia wrote a longer message and showed it to the sheriff and livery owner. Mr. James was unaware of the price change. A written notice is insufficient for someone who cannot hear verbal announcements. He's always paid his debts and will pay the difference now if you state the exact amount. The sheriff read her words aloud, his tone grudging. "Well, Perkins, what's the exact amount owed?" The livery owner hesitated, then mumbled, $3.24. Ethan, who had been watching their lips carefully, immediately reached into his pocket and produced the exact amount. He handed it to Perkins with a dignity that made Olivia's heart ache. The sheriff shrugged. "Seems this matter is resolved, then." He turned to the dispersing crowd. "Show's over, folks. Go about your business." As the onlookers scattered, Olivia noticed Walter Simmons lingering on the periphery, disappointment evident in his face. She had no doubt he'd played some role in this humiliation. Ethan touched her arm gently to get her attention. When she looked at him, he signed "Thank you," one of the few gestures she recognized, his eyes conveying depths of gratitude words couldn't express. She smiled and wrote, "Still have time for lunch?" His answering smile chased away the last traces of tension from his face. They walked to a small cafe at the edge of town, away from the prying eyes of the market day crowd. The owner, Mrs. Reynolds, greeted them with a warm smile that contained no judgment, only welcome. "Take any table you like," she told Olivia, then nodded respectfully to Ethan. "Good to see you again, Mr. James." Over bowls of hearty stew and fresh bread, they exchanged the slate back and forth. Ethan explained that he'd been delayed because the sheriff had intercepted him almost immediately upon his arrival in town. "I should have expected trouble," he wrote. "Walter Simmons never forgave me for outbidding him on the Thompson cattle last fall." Olivia raised an eyebrow questioningly. "He wanted to expand his investments," Ethan explained. "Thought ranching would be easy money. Was angry when the deaf man got the better stock." As they ate, Olivia noticed Ethan was unusually attentive to their surroundings, his eyes constantly scanning the room. She realized he was compensating. For his lack of hearing with heightened visual awareness, nothing escaped his notice. "You read people well," she wrote. Ethan nodded. "Have to. Survival. People say much with faces and bodies they don't say with words." This insight struck Olivia deeply. She too had learned to read the subtle shifts in expression, the microaggressions hidden behind polite society smiles. Their disabilities had given them similar perceptions through different paths. "I brought something for you," Ethan wrote, pulling a small package from his jacket pocket. Wrapped in brown paper tied with string was a slim book, a manual of hand. Communication for the Deaf. It was well worn, its pages soft from years of handling. "My father's," Ethan explained. "Thought you might want to learn more signs. Easier than writing everything." Olivia was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. She opened the book, flipping through pages illustrated with hand positions and their corresponding meanings. "I would like to learn," she wrote, then hesitantly attempted to form the sign for thank you, as she had seen him do. Ethan's face brightened. He gently corrected the position of her fingers, his touch light but sure. The moment of connection lingered between them, a bridge built of shared understanding. After lunch, they walked through the market together. Ethan purchased supplies for the ranch, introducing Olivia to vendors he trusted with simple gestures and written notes. She observed how some treated him with respect, engaging patiently in their unconventional communication, while others spoke to him as though he were a child, or worse, addressed only her as if Ethan weren't present. Through it all, he maintained a stoic dignity that Olivia admired. The humiliation at the livery stable had been frustrating but not surprising to him. Just another day, navigating a world designed for hearing people. At the mercantile, Walter Simmons watched their progress through the store with undisguised disapproval. When Ethan went to examine tools in another aisle, Walter approached Olivia. "I see you've become quite the champion for our local oddity," he said in a low voice. "Is this some misguided Eastern charity, Miss Patterson? Or perhaps you believe damaged goods should stick together?" The cruelty of his words stung, but Olivia had endured worse in Boston drawing rooms. She wrote on her slate, "Mr. James is more of a gentleman than many who can hear and speak perfectly well." Walter's face flushed. "You're making a spectacle of yourself, first arriving as a mail-order bride, then being rejected, and now this association with a deaf rancher. People are talking." Olivia shrugged and wrote, "Let them. Their opinions matter little to me." "They should," Walter hissed. "A woman alone can't afford to ignore society's judgment. You have no protector, no family. Your reputation is all you have." The truth in his words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She did stand alone, her future precarious. But yielding to the petty prejudices of Willow Creek was a price too high to pay for security. Before she could respond, Ethan returned, immediately sensing the tension. He looked between Olivia and Walter, his expression questioning. Walter switched to an artificial smile. "Mr. James," he said with exaggerated mouth. "Movements, just having a friendly chat with Miss Patterson. Good day to you both." He retreated to his counter, where several customers awaited his attention. Outside, in the spring sunshine, Ethan took the slate. "What did he say to upset you?" Olivia hesitated, then wrote, "He thinks we shouldn't be friends because of our differences." Ethan's jaw tightened, but his response surprised her. "He may be right. Your life would be easier without the complications I bring." The selflessness of his concern touched Olivia deeply. She wrote firmly, "I've had enough of easy paths that lead nowhere. I prefer difficult journeys with worthwhile companions." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a wall coming down, hope cautiously rising. He offered his arm and she took it, conscious of the statement they made walking arm in arm down Willow Creek's main street. They reached Martha's boarding house too. Soon. On the porch, away from curious eyes, Ethan took Olivia's slate one last time. "Can I see you again? Sunday dinner?" She nodded, then impulsively reached up to touch his cheek, letting her fingers say what her voice and chalk could not. Ethan caught her hand, pressing it gently against his face for a moment before releasing it with obvious reluctance. As he walked away, Olivia clutched the sign language book to her chest, already planning to study it before their next meeting. Martha was waiting. In the parlor, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "I heard about the commotion at the livery," she said. "Half the town's talking about how you rushed to Ethan James's defense." Olivia nodded, unapologetic. "Walter Simmons came by earlier," Martha continued. "Seemed quite disturbed. Said you were compromising yourself by associating with Ethan." Olivia's eyes flashed with anger as she wrote, "Walter Simmons engineered that entire incident to humiliate Ethan. He's a petty, cruel man." Martha sighed. "I don't disagree with your assessment of Walter, but Olivia, you must consider your position carefully. You're still building your life here. Creating enemies of influential townspeople is risky. So is abandoning someone because they're different," Olivia wrote. "I won't do it. Not again." The words slipped out before she could reconsider them. Martha's eyebrows rose. "Again? There's a story there, I think." Olivia hesitated, then wrote slowly, "After my illness, many friends vanished. Conversation became too difficult. Invitations stopped. My fiancé returned my ring with a note saying he couldn't bear a lifetime of silence." Martha's expression softened. "Oh, my dear, no wonder you understand Ethan's isolation. We speak the same language," Olivia wrote, "one of patience and perseverance." For the next 2 days, Olivia devoted herself to learning sign language from Ethan's book. Her fingers, nimble from years of detailed needlework, quickly adapted to the precise movements. She practiced between customers at Agnes's shop, during meals, and late into the night by candlelight. Agnes caught her signing to herself while sorting buttons on Saturday afternoon. "Well, look at you," she said with approval. "That's a far better solution than that slate you're always carrying." Olivia smiled, grateful for the encouragement. She wrote, "I want to surprise Ethan tomorrow, show him I'm making an effort to learn his language." "That man's smitten with you already," Agnes chuckled. "This will absolutely seal his fate." On Sunday, Thomas Dawson arrived with the wagon instead of Ethan. "He's laid up with a nasty cut," Thomas explained. "Nothing serious, but he wanted me to fetch you if you're still willing to come. Said he'd understand if you'd rather not." Olivia gathered her reticule and shawl without hesitation, much to Martha's dismay. "Alone at his ranch while he's injured?" Martha fretted. "It's not proper, Olivia." Thomas interjected. "My mother's there, Ma'am. Came over to help with the cooking and such. She can chaperone just fine." This assurance slightly mollified Martha, though she still insisted Olivia return before nightfall. The ride to the ranch seemed quicker this time, Olivia's anticipation growing with each mile. When they arrived, Thomas led her to the house, where she found Ethan sitting by the fire, his left arm bandaged and resting in a sling. His face lit up at the sight of her, though embarrassment quickly followed. Caught his arm on a broken fence post, explained a plump, friendly-faced woman Olivia assumed was Mrs. Dawson. Men and their stubborn pride wouldn't ride for the doctor until he'd finished mending the entire fence line. Required 7 stitches, Ethan grimaced at Mrs. Dawson's recounting, even though he couldn't hear the words. He clearly understood she was discussing his injury from her gestures toward his arm. Mrs. Dawson addressed Olivia directly. "You must be Miss Patterson. I'm Eleanor Dawson. Ethan's told us so much about you, or rather, written so much." She smiled warmly. "I'll just be in the kitchen finishing dinner. Thomas will help with the afternoon chores." As they departed, leaving Olivia and Ethan alone in the main room, an awkward silence fell. Ethan looked frustrated by his injury, as though he had failed her somehow by not being at his best. Olivia set down her reticule and removed her shawl and bonnet. Then, instead of reaching for her slate, she raised her hands and carefully signed, "I've been practicing." Ethan's expression transformed from surprise to wonder. He sat forward eagerly, his own hands coming up to sign. "You learned for me?" She nodded, forming the signs with deliberate care. "Your book helped. Still learning." "Go. Slow, please." The joy on his face made every hour of practice worthwhile. He signed slowly. "This means more than you know." For the next hour, they conversed in this new, shared language, Olivia frequently consulting the book she'd brought along, Ethan patiently correcting her form when needed. It was halting and imperfect, but infinitely more intimate than passing a slate back and forth. When Mrs. Dawson called them for dinner, Olivia was surprised to realize how quickly the time had passed. The meal itself was a pleasant affair, with Mrs. Dawson filling the silence with cheerful chatter about local news, while Olivia and Ethan communicated through a combination of signs, facial expressions, and occasional written notes. "It's remarkable," Mrs. Dawson commented, watching them. "I've known Ethan since he was a boy, and I've never seen him communicate so easily with anyone outside his father." After dinner, despite Ethan's protests, Mrs. Dawson insisted on clearing up alone. "You two go sit by the fire. That arm needs rest, Ethan James, and I won't hear arguments." In the fading light of afternoon, they returned to the main room, where Ethan carefully added logs to the fire one-handed. When he turned back to Olivia, his expression had grown serious. "I need to ask something important," he signed, his movements deliberate. Olivia nodded, her heart quickening. "People in town are talking about you because of me," he continued. "Walter Simmons spreading rumors, said you're ruining your chances by spending time with the deaf man." Olivia frowned, signing, "Walter Simmons doesn't decide my life." "But he's right," Ethan insisted. "You could have a normal life. Find a husband who can hear, have an easier path." The frustration that had simmered since the incident at the livery burst forth. Olivia signed emphatically, "Don't want an easier path. Don't want normal." She paused, struggling to find the right signs, then resorted to the slate. "I came west, hoping for a fresh start, yes, but also for authenticity. In Boston, I pretended my voice would return, that I could still fit into society. It was exhausting and lonely. Here with you, I don't pretend. I don't need to." Ethan read her words, his expression softening. He wrote beneath her message, "I feel the same, but I worry. Life with me would never be easy. Life isn't meant to be easy," she wrote. "It's meant to be lived truthfully." Something shifted in Ethan's. A gaze. Determination replacing uncertainty. He set down the slate and, with his good arm, signed slowly. "Then may I court you properly, with intention?" The directness of his question took Olivia's breath away. In Boston, courtship was a dance of innuendo and social maneuvering. Ethan offered honesty instead, a clear path rather than a maze of conventions. Her hands trembled slightly as she signed, "Yes, I would like that very much." The smile that spread across Ethan's face held the promise of spring after a long winter, hope, blooming in unlikely soil. In that moment, in a ranch house far from the world she'd known, Olivia Patterson felt something she had thought lost forever, the sensation of coming home. By May, spring had fully embraced Montana territory. The hills surrounding Willow Creek bloomed with wildflowers, and calves frolicked in pastures under watchful maternal eyes. In Agnes's seamstress shop, business thrived as townspeople requested new garments for the upcoming Founders' Day celebration. "I've never been so busy," Agnes sighed, sorting through orders piled on her work table. Every woman in town wants a new dress for the dance. Olivia smiled as she pinned the hem of a blue silk gown commissioned by the banker's wife. Over the past month, she had become indispensable to Agnes, her skillful needlework earning admiration, even from those who whispered about her association with the deaf rancher. Agnes paused in her work, studying Olivia with motherly concern. "You know the Founders' Day celebration is next weekend. The whole town will be there," Olivia nodded, continuing her precise stitches. "Has Ethan mentioned taking you?" Agnes asked. Setting down her work, Olivia signed, "He hasn't mentioned it." Her hands moved with growing fluency after weeks of diligent practice. Agnes, who had picked up a few basic signs herself, understood enough to follow. "Maybe he doesn't know about it. These town events aren't exactly priorities for a man who lives miles from civilization." The bell above the shop door jingled, and both women looked up to see Martha entering, her expression troubled. "Olivia, dear, could you come to the boarding house? There's someone who wishes to speak with you." Agnes waved her off. "Go on. The banker's wife won't need this gown until tomorrow." As they walked down the main street, Martha explained in a low voice, "A gentleman arrived on the morning train. Says he's from Boston and has been searching for you for months." Olivia's steps faltered, her mind racing through possibilities. Who from her old life would track her to Montana? The answer waited in Martha's parlor, a tall, distinguished man, in his 50s, with silver-streaked hair and familiar grey eyes that widened at the sight of her. "Olivia," he breathed, rising from his chair. "Thank God you're alive." She recognized him immediately, Jonathan Harrington, her father's oldest friend and former business partner. The last time she'd seen him was at her parents' funeral. Martha discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone. Olivia reached for her slate, but before she could write, Jonathan crossed the room and embraced her. "We feared the worst," he said, releasing her to study her face. "When you sold the house and disappeared. If your father's solicitor hadn't mentioned you'd inquired about trains west." He shook his head. "Why, Olivia? Why flee without a word?" She wrote quickly, "I needed a fresh start." Boston held too many painful memories. Jonathan read her words, his expression softening. "I understand that, but to leave everyone who cared about you, to throw yourself into the wilderness without protection?" "I'm not as fragile as everyone believed," she wrote firmly. "Clearly not," he acknowledged, glancing around the modest parlor. "But this can't be the life Thomas and Eleanor Patterson wanted for their daughter. Living in a boarding house in a frontier town, working as what? A seamstress?" His tone held no malice, only genuine concern. Yet Olivia bristled at the implied judgment. She was about to respond when Jonathan continued. "I've come to bring you home, Olivia. Your father's business partner's son, Frederick, has been inconsolable since you left. He asked me to find you and convey his deepest regrets for breaking your engagement. He realizes now what a fool he was." Shock rendered Olivia momentarily speechless. Frederick had returned her ring with a note expressing relief that they wouldn't face a lifetime of awkward silence. Now he regrets his decision? Jonathan misinterpreted her silence as consideration. "He's prepared to marry you immediately upon your return. The house on Beacon Street is still available. He would purchase it for you. You could resume your rightful place in society." Olivia's hands trembled as she wrote, "Why this change of heart?" Jonathan hesitated. "Frederick has matured, and there have been developments with your father's estate. The railway investments your father made before his death have increased substantially in value. The trustee has been attempting to locate you as the sole heir." Understanding dawned with painful clarity. She wasn't destitute after all, and suddenly Frederick found his conscience. "How much?" she wrote bluntly. "A considerable sum," Jonathan admitted. "Enough to make you one of Boston's wealthier young women." Olivia took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. She had come to Montana believing she needed a husband for security. Now she learned she had options: financial independence, a return to familiar surroundings, even a rekindled engagement. Yet, as she contemplated these possibilities, she felt no pull toward her former life. Instead, her mind filled with images of Ethan's ranch, his patient hands teaching her to sign, the quiet understanding between them that required no words at all. "I'm not returning to Boston," she wrote with steady resolve. "Please thank Frederick for his timely change of heart, but I must decline." Jonathan's eyebrows rose in disbelief. "Surely you're not serious. What could possibly hold you in this primitive place?" Before she could answer, the parlor door opened, and Martha appeared with Ethan behind her. He was dressed in his Sunday best, his hat in his hands, clearly not expecting to find Olivia with a stranger. Martha looked apologetic. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. James had arranged to take Olivia to dinner." Jonathan turned to study Ethan, whose eyes remained fixed on Olivia, sensing her distress. Without hesitation, he crossed to her side, his questioning gaze never leaving her face. Olivia signed rapidly. "This is my father's friend from Boston. He wants me to return." Understanding dawned in Ethan's expression, followed by a shadow of resignation. He nodded slightly, then extended his hand to Jonathan with dignified formality. Jonathan's shock was evident as he automatically shook Ethan's hand. "I don't understand. Who is this man?" Martha stepped forward. "Mr. Harrington, this is Ethan James. He owns one of the more successful ranches in the area." "And he's deaf?" Jonathan asked, observing the sign exchange between Olivia and Ethan. "Yes," Martha confirmed, "and one of the finest men in the territory." Jonathan turned to Olivia with dawning comprehension. "Is this why you won't return to Boston? Because of him?" Olivia signed to Ethan. "He discovered I've inherited money. Frederick wants to marry me now." A flicker of pain crossed Ethan's features before he carefully schooled his expression. He signed back, "You should consider the offer." Security of a familiar place, the selflessness of his response, putting her welfare above his own desires, cemented Olivia's decision. She turned to Jonathan and wrote firmly, "I'm building a life here. A good life with people who value me as I am, not despite or because of my limitations." Jonathan looked between them, his worldview visibly shaken. "Olivia, be reasonable. What kind of future could you possibly have with—" He gestured helplessly at Ethan. "With these circumstances?" Ethan, who had been reading their lips as best he could, straightened his shoulders. He took Olivia's slate and wrote in his precise hand, "Mr. Harrington, I understand your concern for Olivia's welfare. It's a concern I share, but I believe a person's worth isn't measured by their limitations, but by their determination to overcome them." Jonathan read these words with surprise, clearly not expecting such eloquence from a frontier rancher, much less a deaf one. Olivia added beneath Ethan's message, "I came west seeking a husband for security. I found something more valuable: self-reliance and happiness. I won't trade that for all the comfort Boston offers. At least take time to consider," Jonathan pleaded. "I'll be staying at the hotel for 3 days before returning east. The railway shares are yours regardless of your decision. I'll make arrangements with the local bank." After Jonathan departed, an awkward silence fell. Martha tactfully excused herself, leaving Olivia and Ethan alone in the parlor. "I'm sorry," Ethan signed. "Bad timing." "No," Olivia replied. "Perfect timing. Now everything is clear." Ethan's expression remained troubled. "You have a chance for a better life now. Money changes things." Olivia shook her head firmly. "Money doesn't change what matters." She hesitated, then added, "Unless you don't want me to stay." The vulnerability in her question broke through Ethan's careful reserve. He took her hands, stilling their motion, and looked directly into her eyes. Then he released her to sign, "I want you in my life more than anything." But I need to know you stay for the right reasons, not because you have nowhere else to go." In that moment, Olivia realized the depth of Ethan's insecurities, not about his deafness, but about being chosen freely without reservation. She reached for the slate, needing to express herself fully. "I'm staying because in Boston I was defined by what I'd lost, my voice, my family, my place in society. Here, with you, I'm defined by what I've found, strength, purpose, and a connection I never thought possible. My inheritance changes nothing about what I want or who I want to be with." Ethan read her words, his eyes suspiciously bright in the afternoon light. He wrote beneath her message, "Then will you come to the Founders' Day celebration with me as my declared sweetheart?" A smile bloomed across Olivia's face as she signed an emphatic yes. The morning of Founders' Day dawned clear and warm, a perfect late spring day. Willow Creek's main street had been transformed with bunting and banners commemorating the town's 15th anniversary. Stalls lined the thoroughfare, offering everything from homemade pies to handcrafted jewelry. In the town square, a platform had been erected for speeches, and later, a dance floor for the evening's festivities. Olivia stood before the mirror in her room at the boarding house, adjusting the collar of her new dress, a creation of her own. Design in deep green silk with delicate embroidery at the cuffs and neckline. Agnes had insisted she use the finest fabric in the shop. "If you're going to make a statement, make it magnificent," the seamstress had declared, and a statement it would be. Today, Olivia would appear publicly as Ethan's sweetheart for the first time. An announcement that would formalize their courtship to the entire community. Martha knocked on her door. "Ethan's here," she called, "and my goodness, the man cleans up well." In the parlor, Ethan waited in a new suit of charcoal gray, his hair neatly trimmed, boots polished to a shine. When Olivia entered, his expression of admiration needed no translation. "You look beautiful," he signed. "So do you," she replied with a teasing smile. Martha watched their exchange with misty eyes. "You two will be the handsomest couple there," she declared. "Now off with you, the festivities are starting." As they walked toward the town square, Olivia was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Some were merely curious, others openly disapproving. Walter Simmons stood outside his store, his face darkening at the sight of them arm in arm. Yet for every hostile glance, there seemed to be a friendly nod. Agnes waved cheerfully from her stall, displaying handmade lace. Thomas Dawson tipped his hat respectfully, his parents beside him offering warm smiles. Even Sheriff Holt nodded a grudging acknowledgement. The morning passed pleasantly as they explored the various stalls. Ethan purchased a ribbon for Olivia's hair, a deep blue that complemented her green dress. She helped him select a handcrafted leather belt from the tanner's display. They were examining a woodworker's carvings when Jonathan Harrington approached, looking somewhat out of place in his Eastern attire. "Olivia," he greeted, then nodded to Ethan. "Mr. James." To her surprise, Jonathan attempted a clumsy finger-spelled hello that made Ethan's eyebrows rise in surprise. "I spoke with Mrs. Blackwood yesterday," Jonathan explained. "She suggested I might better understand your decision if I learned a bit about your communication methods." Olivia smiled, touched by his effort. She wrote on her slate, "Thank you for trying." "I've made arrangements with the bank as promised," Jonathan continued. "Your inheritance will be available to you here. I'll leave the details with Mrs. Blackwood before I depart tomorrow." Ethan, who had been following their lips, signed to Olivia, "He seems to accept your decision." She nodded, then wrote for Jonathan, "I appreciate your concern for my welfare. Please tell everyone in Boston that I am well and happy." Jonathan studied her face, then Ethan's, and something in his expression softened. "I believe you are. Your father would be proud of the independent woman you've become, Olivia." Different from what he might have envisioned, but proud nonetheless. After he walked away, Ethan signed, "Good man, cares for you." "Yes," Olivia agreed, "but he belongs to my past." At noon, the town gathered before the platform where Mayor Thompson delivered a speech recounting Willow Creek's founding and growth. Ethan and Olivia stood at the edge of the crowd, where he could watch the mayor's lips without obstruction. As the speech concluded, the mayor announced, "And now, in celebration of our town's progress, we've prepared a special bell-ringing ceremony. This new bell will hang in our recently completed schoolhouse, calling the children of Willow Creek to education for generations to come." A cloth was pulled away, revealing a gleaming brass bell mounted on a temporary stand. The mayor gestured to the oldest resident of Willow Creek to do the honors of the first ring. As the bell's clear tone rang out across the square, Olivia felt Ethan's hand tighten on hers. She looked up to find his expression transformed with wonder. "I felt it," he signed excitedly. "The vibration. Through the ground and in the air, I felt the bell's voice." The simple joy in his face moved Olivia deeply. In that moment, she understood something profound about Ethan he didn't dwell on. What he couldn't experience, but found wonder in what he could. After the ceremony, they joined the community picnic spread across the town square. They sat with the Dawsons, communicating through a mixture of signs, lip reading, and written notes that had become second nature to their growing circle. As they ate, Olivia noticed Walter Simmons deep in conversation with several town council members, casting occasional glances in their direction. The intensity of his gaze made her uneasy. The afternoon festivities included children's races, a horseshoe competition, which Ethan entered and won handily, and various exhibits of local crafts and produce. By late afternoon, the celebration shifted toward preparations for the evening dance. Musicians began setting up on the platform, testing their instruments. Lanterns were strung across the square, waiting to be lit at dusk. Couples strolled arm in arm, ladies in their finest dresses, gentlemen in suits rarely worn on the frontier. Ethan guided Olivia to a quiet spot beneath a large oak tree at the edge of the square. His expression had grown serious. "I need to ask you something important," he signed. Olivia nodded, her heart quickening at his solemnity. "Your inheritance changes things," he continued. "You don't need a husband for security now. You could build any life you want." She started to protest, but he gently stopped her hands. "Let me finish. I want you to stay because you choose me, not because it's your only option. So I'm asking clearly, would you consider becoming my wife? Not today or tomorrow, but when you're certain it's what you want." The directness of his proposal, so typical of Ethan's straightforward nature, brought tears to Olivia's eyes. There was no artifice here, no social maneuvering or calculation of advantage, just a man asking a woman to share his life with all its challenges and joys. Before she could respond, Mayor Thompson's voice boomed from the platform, calling for everyone's attention. "Before we begin our Founders' Day dance, the Town Council has an announcement regarding an exciting development for Willow Creek." Ethan frowned, unable to hear the announcement. Olivia started to translate, but the mayor's next words froze her. Hands mid-sign, Mr. Walter Simmons has generously proposed funding a new community project, a home for unfortunates unable to care for themselves due to disability or infirmity. A murmur ran through the crowd as Walter stepped onto the platform, the very picture of benevolent philanthropy. "My friends and neighbors," Walter began, his voice carrying across the square, "progress means not just economic growth, but also demonstrating our Christian charity toward those less fortunate. I propose establishing the Willow Creek Asylum for the disabled, where those suffering from afflictions such as deafness, muteness, and similar conditions can receive proper care." Olivia felt Ethan stiffen beside her, his eyes narrowing as he read Walter's lips. These unfortunates often struggle to maintain independent lives, Walter continued, as we've witnessed in our own community. The noble attempt of Mr. James to run a ranch despite his limitations, or Miss Patterson's efforts to support herself despite her vocal affliction, these are admirable but ultimately challenging paths. The calculated cruelty of Walter's announcement, disguised as charity, left Olivia breathless with anger. This was his response to their public courtship, an attempt to classify them as pitiable invalids, incapable of normal lives. Ethan's face had gone very still, his jaw tight with controlled fury. Without hesitation, he took Olivia's hand and led her directly toward the platform, cutting through the crowd with determined strides. Walter faltered mid-sentence as he saw them approach, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Reaching the edge of the platform, Ethan helped Olivia up the steps, then followed, standing tall before the assembled townspeople. The crowd fell silent, watching the unexpected interruption with collective held breath. Olivia looked out at the faces, some curious, some uncomfortable, some openly hostile, others supportive. This was the moment that would define their future in Willow Creek. Taking a deep breath, she turned to face Walter Simmons, her chin high, her purpose clear. Standing before the assembled townspeople, Olivia felt a lifetime of held-back words pressing against her throat. For once, she wished for her full voice, but would have to make do with what she had. She turned to Ethan, signing quickly, "May I speak for us?" He nodded, his trust in her evident even amid his anger. Olivia faced Walter Simmons, who watched with barely concealed contempt. Drawing a deep breath, she pushed her damaged voice to its limits. "Mr. Simmons," she began, her words raspy but audible. "In the hushed square, your concern is misplaced." The crowd murmured in surprise at hearing her speak for the first time. Olivia pressed on, each word carefully formed. "We do not need your charity or your asylum." Walter's smile turned patronizing. "Miss Patterson, your condition clearly affects your judgment. While admirable, your independence and Mr. James's is ultimately unsustainable. My proposal would ensure you both receive proper care." Ethan stepped forward, his expression resolute. He took the slate that hung from Olivia's wrist and wrote in bold strokes, "I run a profitable ranch. I support myself through hard work. I need no charity or asylum." He held the slate up for all to see, his gaze challenging anyone to dispute his words. Mayor Thompson looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Simmons meant no offense, I'm sure. His proposal comes from genuine concern." "No," Olivia interrupted, her strained voice carrying surprising authority. "His proposal comes from prejudice, disguised as kindness." Walter's face flushed red. "You forget yourself, Miss Patterson. You arrived here penniless, rejected as a mail-order bride, taken in through the town's goodwill. And you, James," he turned to Ethan with undisguised disdain, "you may manage that small ranch of yours, but let's not pretend you wouldn't benefit from specialized care." Agnes pushed through the crowd to stand beneath the platform. "That's enough, Walter. Ethan James runs one of the most efficient ranches in the county, and Olivia's work has doubled my business." Thomas Dawson joined her. "Mr. James taught me more about ranching in 3 months than my own father did in 10 years. He doesn't need anyone's help or pity." Walter's expression hardened. "This emotional display doesn't change facts. People with such severe impediments require specialized supervision. The council will vote on my proposal next week." Olivia felt Ethan's hand take hers. He stepped forward again, writing quickly on the slate, "I came to this celebration to announce my intention to marry Miss Patterson with her consent. We are not seeking charity, but respect for our choice to build a life together." A hush fell over the crowd as Ethan's written declaration was passed around. Some faces showed shock, others disapproval, but Olivia also noted nods of support and Smiles of encouragement from unexpected quarters. Walter scoffed. Marriage? Between two people who can barely communicate with normal society? How would you raise children? How would you engage in commerce or civic duties? Before either could respond, Jonathan Harrington stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. As a distinguished visitor from the East, his presence commanded immediate attention. "If I may address this gathering," he began formally. "I've come to know Miss Patterson since childhood. She was raised in one of Boston's finest families and received an excellent education. Her vocal condition resulted from an illness that claimed her parents and sister. Despite this tragedy, she maintained their business affairs competently until deciding to seek a new beginning here." He turned to Ethan with newfound respect. "And while I've known Mr. James only briefly, I've observed his intelligence, dignity, and industriousness. In Boston's highest circles, we consider a man's character the measure of his worth, not his physical capabilities." Jonathan faced Walter directly. "Furthermore, Miss Patterson has recently inherited a substantial fortune through her father's investments. She chooses to remain in Willow Creek not from necessity, but from preference for the life and community she's found here. Specifically, her preference for Mr. James's company." Murmurs rippled through the crowd at this revelation. Olivia squeezed Ethan's hand in silent gratitude for Jonathan's unexpected advocacy. Walter looked momentarily disconcerted before recovering. "Money doesn't eliminate their limitations. An asylum would still provide appropriate—" "No, Mayor," Thompson interrupted, clearly reassessing the situation in light of Jonathan's revelations. "I believe we've heard enough, Walter. Your proposal was offered in what you considered the town's best interest, but it appears Miss Patterson and Mr. James have made their own arrangements." He turned to address the gathering. "This is a celebration of our town's progress. Part of that progress must include recognizing that people overcome challenges in different ways. If Miss Patterson and Mr. James have found happiness together despite, or perhaps because of, their unique circumstances, who are we to interfere?" Walter's face darkened with humiliation. "The council vote can wait," the mayor concluded firmly. "For now, I believe we have a dance to commence, and perhaps a courtship to celebrate." He gestured toward Olivia and Ethan with a tentative smile. The tension in the square gradually dissolved as the musicians struck up a lively tune, signaling a return to the planned festivities. Walter Simmons stormed off the platform, pushing through the crowd without meeting anyone's eyes. Olivia felt a momentary pang of sympathy for him, a man so consumed by propriety and appearance that he couldn't recognize the humanity and difference. As people began to pair up for dancing, Ethan and Olivia remained on the platform. Suddenly, uncertain, Jonathan approached, offering a formal bow to them both. "I hope I didn't overstep," he said, "but I couldn't stand by while that man disguised his prejudice as concern." Olivia signed her thanks, which Ethan translated aloud in his rarely used voice for Jonathan's benefit. "She is grateful. As am I." Jonathan nodded. "I'll be leaving tomorrow, Olivia. Your father would be proud of the life you're building here. Different from what he might have imagined, but no less worthy." He extended his hand to Ethan. "Take care of her, Mr. James, though I suspect she's equally capable of taking care of you." After Jonathan departed, Ethan and Olivia descended from the platform into a community transformed. People who had previously avoided them now approached with tentative greetings. Some attempted clumsy signs they'd clearly just learned from Thomas or Agnes. Others simply nodded with newfound respect. As lanterns were lit across the square and twilight settled over Willow Creek, Ethan turned to Olivia with a question in his eyes. He signed, "Dance with me?" She hesitated. "You can dance?" A smile tugged at his lips. "Father taught me the steps, said I didn't need to hear music to move with grace." He led her to the edge of the dance floor, where the vibrations from the musicians' instruments were strongest. Placing her hand on his shoulder, he took her waist gently, guiding her into a simple waltz. What they lacked in precision, they made up for in connection. Ethan counted the rhythm in his head, his steps sure and steady. Olivia followed his lead, marveling at this new dimension of the man she'd come to love. They weren't the most accomplished dancers in Willow Creek that night, but they were perhaps the most watched. Not with the previous stares of curiosity or pity, but with a dawning recognition that love and determination could overcome boundaries most considered insurmountable. As the evening drew to a close, Ethan escorted Olivia back to Martha's boarding house. On the porch, shielded from curious eyes by the gathering darkness, he signed, "You never answered my question from earlier." Olivia tilted her head questioningly. "About becoming my wife," he clarified, before Walter's announcement. The events of the day had nearly pushed his proposal from her mind. Now, in the quiet aftermath of their public stand, the question returned with even greater significance. She didn't hesitate, her hands forming the signs with certainty. "Yes, I would be honored to marry you." Ethan's smile illuminated his face, joy radiating from him like heat from a flame. From his pocket, he withdrew a small worn box. Inside nestled a ring of simple design, a gold band with a single pearl. "My mother's," he explained. "Father saved it for when I found someone to love." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Olivia felt the weight of history and promise it represented, not just Ethan's family legacy, but the future they would build together, bridging worlds, and limitations that others considered defining. When Martha opened the door, having watched through the window with poorly disguised interest, her eyes immediately went to the ring. "Well," she said, a smile warming her face, "it seems congratulations are in order." News of their engagement spread through Willow Creek with remarkable speed. By the following morning, Agnes greeted Olivia with an enthusiastic hug when she arrived at the shop. "I knew it. I told Mrs. Reynolds just last week that you two would make it official before summer's end." Olivia smiled, her hands moving in the signs Agnes had learned. "We haven't set a date yet." "Well, whenever it is, you'll need a proper wedding dress. And don't think of paying for it. Consider it my gift." Throughout the day, customers offered congratulations with varying degrees of sincerity. Some were genuinely pleased, others clearly still processing the unusual match. Mrs. Baker, the banker's wife, paused while collecting her blue silk gown. "I admit I didn't understand at first," she said carefully. "But watching you two at a dance, there's something special in how you communicate, something many married couples never achieve despite having all their faculties." Olivia nodded, grateful for the woman's honesty and growing acceptance. Not everyone was supportive. Walter Simmons's wife entered the shop with barely concealed disdain, requesting alterations to a dress while pointedly avoiding Olivia's assistance. And the Reverend's wife made a comment within Olivia's hearing about the Lord's mysterious ways in matching the afflicted. But these voices were increasingly in the minority. Something had shifted in Willow Creek's perception, a widening of possibilities for what constituted a worthy life and partnership. 3 days after the Founders' Day celebration, Ethan arrived at the shop near closing time. His expression was unusually serious as he waited for Agnes to step into the back room before approaching Olivia. "We need to talk," he signed. "Can you come to the ranch this Sunday?" Concern fluttered in Olivia's chest. "Is something wrong?" Ethan hesitated. "Not wrong, important, about our future." Throughout the week, Olivia's mind conjured various scenarios. Had Ethan reconsidered their engagement? Was there some aspect of ranch life he feared she couldn't adapt to? By Sunday morning, her nerves were stretched taut as she waited for Thomas Dawson to collect her in the wagon. To her surprise, Ethan himself arrived, looking exceptionally handsome in clean work clothes, his expression a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The ride to the ranch passed in companionable silence, though Olivia noticed Ethan casting frequent glances her way, as if reassuring himself of her presence. When they arrived, another surprise awaited. The Dawsons were there, along with Agnes and Martha, all wearing their Sunday best. "What's happening?" Olivia signed to Ethan, confusion evident in her face. He took her hands in his. "I realized something after Founders' Day. We don't need to wait or plan an elaborate wedding. If you're certain, if you're ready, understanding." Dawned slowly. "Today," she signed, her eyes widening. Ethan nodded. "Reverend Miller is waiting inside. But only if you want this. We can wait if you prefer a proper ceremony in town." Olivia glanced at the assembled friends, their faces bearing expressions of happy anticipation. Martha had brought a small valise, presumably containing Olivia's things, indicating her collaboration in this surprise. For a moment, Olivia considered all that a traditional wedding would entail: the preparations, the church ceremony, the unavoidable whispers and stares from those in town who still viewed their union with skepticism. Then she looked at Ethan's face, open, honest, loving, and the home he had built, ready to share with her. No waiting. She signed decisively. Today is perfect. Relief and joy transformed Ethan's features. He gestured toward the house, but before they could move, Olivia held up one finger, asking him to wait. She turned to Martha. "Could I have a few minutes to prepare?" she asked in her raspy voice, wanting this moment to be special despite its spontaneity. Martha beamed. "Of course, dear. Agnes and I brought everything you might need. Come along." In the guest bedroom, Olivia found a simple but beautiful white dress laid out on the bed, not the elaborate wedding gown Agnes had mentioned creating, but a lovely alternative clearly made with care over the past week. "We guessed your measurements. From the dresses you've altered," Agnes explained as she helped Olivia change. "Ethan approached me the day after Founders' Day with this plan. Said he didn't want to wait. Didn't see the point in elaborate ceremonies when what mattered was building your life together." Martha arranged Olivia's hair with wildflowers Ethan had gathered that morning. "That man adores you," she said, meeting Olivia's eyes in the small mirror. "You know that, don't you?" Olivia nodded, emotion tightening her throat. "It won't be easy," Martha continued. "No marriage is. But you two understand struggle in ways most couples never will. That's a strength, not a weakness." When they emerged from the bedroom, the main room had been transformed. Fresh-cut wildflowers adorned every surface, and the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the small gathering. Reverend Miller stood before the fireplace, his Bible open in his hands, and there was Ethan, waiting by the hearth, his expression transforming as Olivia appeared. The naked adoration in his eyes would have brought her to tears if she hadn't been so filled with joy. The ceremony was brief and unconventional. Ethan had written his vows, which he handed to Reverend Miller to read aloud while simultaneously signing the words to Olivia. "I promise to build a life of equal partnership where our differences complement rather than divide us. I promise to see your silence not as an absence, but as a space where understanding deepens. I promise to face the world's judgment with you, never forgetting that what others perceive as our greatest weaknesses have led to our greatest strength." Each other? Olivia's vows were signed directly to Ethan, with Martha softly voicing the translation for the others. "I promise to be your ears when needed, your voice when wanted, but never to define you by what you cannot hear or me by what I cannot say. I promise to create a home where communication flows, not from lips and ears alone, but from heart to heart." I promise to stand beside you in dignity and determination, grateful each day for the silence that brought us together." When Reverend Miller pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan took Olivia's face gently between his hands, his eyes conveying devotion words could never adequately express. Their kiss was both a seal upon their vows and a declaration to the world. They had found in each other's so-called limitations a freedom most would never know. The small celebration afterward was filled with laughter and conversation flowing in multiple forms: spoken words, signed exchanges, written notes, and the universal language of smiles and embraces. Mrs. Dawson had prepared a feast, and Thomas produced a fiddle, playing lively tunes, while his father attempted to teach Ethan and Olivia a folk dance that dissolved into good-natured laughter. As twilight settled over the ranch, the guests departed with hugs and well-wishes, leaving the newlyweds alone in what was now their shared home. The reality of the day's events seemed to settle over them both as the door closed behind Martha, the last to leave. "Wife," Ethan signed the word, carrying wonder. "Husband," Olivia replied, equally amazed by the transformation a few hours had wrought. He took her hands, his expression growing serious. "Are you happy with this? Our small wedding, this modest house?" Olivia looked around at the ranch house that had so impressed her on first visit, the bookshelves filled with worlds of knowledge, the clockwork bench speaking to Ethan's precision and patience, the solid walls built by generations of James men. Then she looked at Ethan himself, the man who had seen her silence not as a barrier, but as a kindred spirit to his own silent world. "This isn't a modest house," she signed, her movements eloquent with emotion. "It's the richest home I've ever known." Later, that night, as they stood on the porch watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky, Ethan wrapped his arms around Olivia from behind, his chin resting on her head. In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the darkened hills, sounds she could hear but he could only imagine. Yet they stood in the same moment, under the same stars, their hearts beating to rhythms neither could actually hear but both could feel, different perceptions of the same world, complementary rather than divisive. Olivia turned in his embrace to face him, her hands rising between them to sign words no one else would witness. "In Boston, I was defined by what I'd lost. Here with you, I'm defined by what I've found." Ethan's answering smile held the promise of all their tomorrows, days built not on perfect hearing or perfect speech, but on perfect understanding. They had found in each other's silence the most eloquent language of all: acceptance without condition, love without reservation, and the quiet miracle of being truly seen. In a world that valued noise and conformity, they had created a sanctuary of meaningful silence and authentic connection, proving that sometimes the most powerful expressions of love require no sound at all. The autumn sun cast a golden glow across the expanded James Ranch as Olivia stood on the porch, watching her husband demonstrate proper lassoing technique to their eager ranch hands. In 3 years, their property had nearly tripled in size, not because they needed more land, but because Walter Simmons's failed attempt to ruin them had backfired spectacularly. After the Founders' Day confrontation, Walter had tried to turn the town against them through whisper campaigns and business interference. But Jonathan Harrington, before returning east, had arranged for Olivia's inheritance to be properly invested, including purchasing the struggling ranch adjacent to Ethan's property when its owner decided to return east. With expanded acreage came opportunities. Ethan's innovative cattle breeding techniques, once dismissed as a deaf man's odd notions, proved remarkably successful. The James Shorthorn became known throughout Montana Territory for its hardiness and quality. Meanwhile, Olivia had transformed the abandoned ranch house on their new property into a small but thriving seamstress school where she taught young women the fine needlework skills she'd brought from Boston. The sound of a child's laughter drew Olivia's attention to the garden, where 4-year-old Sarah Dawson was teaching 2-year-old Elizabeth James the signs for different flowers. Elizabeth's dark curls and hazel eyes mirrored her father's, while her determined spirit reflected both her parents. Elizabeth had been born with perfect hearing, a fact confirmed by the doctor's tests and her startled reaction to a dropped pan. In her earliest days, yet she lived in a household where silent communication flowed as naturally as spoken words. By her first birthday, her tiny hands were already forming simple signs, even as her vocal vocabulary developed normally. Thomas Dawson, now the ranch foreman at 22, rode toward the barn, tipping his hat to Olivia as he passed. His mother followed behind in a wagon filled with preserves and fresh bread. Eleanor Dawson had appointed herself unofficial grandmother to Elizabeth and made the journey from their homestead twice weekly with provisions and doting affection. "The men are working up appetites out there," Eleanor called as she pulled the wagon to a stop. "Thought we might need extra for supper." Olivia smiled and signed her thanks, her voice reserved for situations that truly required it. Over the years, her raspy whisper had strengthened somewhat, though it would never return to its former clarity. But this no longer bothered her. In the world she and Ethan had built, multiple forms of communication existed side by side, each valued for its purpose. "How's the planning coming for the school expansion?" Eleanor asked, climbing down from the wagon. Olivia signed her response, which Eleanor had become quite proficient at understanding. The new wing should be finished before the first snow. "We already have 5 students confirmed for spring term." The seamstress school had begun with just 2, local girls seeking to learn a trade. Now, young women from as far as Helena sought Olivia's instruction, some staying in the converted bunkhouse during their months of training. The marriage of traditional Eastern techniques with practical frontier adaptations had created a unique curriculum that yielded graduates whose work was increasingly sought after throughout the territory. "And Walter Simmons's girl is still among them?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow in surprise. Olivia nodded. Rebecca Simmons, Walter's 18-year-old daughter, had approached Olivia after church 6 months earlier, her request to join the school. Delivered in halting but determined sign language, she had taught herself in secret. "Rebecca has genuine talent," Olivia signed. "Her father still doesn't know she's enrolled for spring." Walter had maintained his opposition to the James family's growing influence in Willow Creek, though his proposed asylum had been permanently shelved after the town council unanimously rejected it. His mercantile business had suffered when the railroad finally reached Willow Creek last year, bringing competition he hadn't anticipated. Inside the main house, now expanded with 2 additional rooms, Olivia and Eleanor prepared supper while Elizabeth helped by arranging napkins with serious concentration. The child moved between the silent and speaking worlds with the fluid adaptability of youth, addressing her mother in sign while speaking aloud to visitors who didn't understand their hand language. The sound of boots on the porch announced the men's return. Ethan entered first, his face lighting up at the sight of his family. Elizabeth ran to him with arms outstretched, and he swept her up in a fluid motion, her giggles filling the room as he spun her around. "Pa, look!" she exclaimed, then switched seamlessly to signing. "I put napkins on the table all by myself." Ethan's expression of exaggerated amazement made the child beam with pride. He set her down and crossed to Olivia, placing a gentle kiss on her forehead, their standard greeting, unchanged since their first days of marriage. The evening meal had become something of a community gathering. Thomas and Eleanor Dawson were regular presences, and tonight they were joined by Agnes, who at 70 had finally retired from her shop in town, selling the business to one of Olivia's first graduates. Even Martha visited once a month, bringing news from the boarding house she still ran with increasing help from her niece. Conversation flowed in multiple streams. Spoken words, signed exchanges, and notes passed for more complex topics. The boundaries between these forms had blurred, over time, creating a hybrid language unique to their expanding circle. Several ranch hands had learned basic signs, finding them useful for communicating across noisy pastures or during roundups when voices couldn't carry. After the meal, as dusk painted the mountains in deepening shadows, Thomas pulled out his fiddle. The vibrations of the instrument against the wooden floorboards allowed Ethan to feel the rhythm, if not the melody. He took Olivia's hand, leading her into the familiar steps of their evening dance, a tradition they'd maintained since their wedding night. Elizabeth watched from her perch on Eleanor's lap, clapping in time to music only some of them could hear, but all could appreciate in their own way. Later, after their guests had departed and Elizabeth was tucked into bed with a story signed by her father, Olivia and Ethan sat on the porch swing, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "Did you ever imagine this life?" Ethan signed, his gestures illuminated by the lantern hanging from the porch beam. Olivia smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Never. When I stepped off that train, I thought I was at the end of my journey, not the beginning." Ethan's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes I still can't believe Walter's rejection led you to me." "His greatest gift," Olivia signed with a hint of mischief in her expression. The mention of Walter reminded Olivia of news Martha had shared during dinner. "Did Martha tell you Walter's planning to sell the mercantile and move to Denver?" Ethan nodded. "Thomas heard it from the blacksmith yesterday. Apparently, he's been offered a partnership in his brother's business. I hope he finds peace there," Olivia signed, surprising even herself with the sincerity of the sentiment. "You're too forgiving," Ethan responded, though his expression held admiration. Rather than criticism, not forgiveness, understanding. His limitations were far greater than ours. He couldn't see beyond what was different to what was possible. This philosophy had guided their approach to the community over the years. Rather than retreat into isolation or fight against persistent prejudice, they had simply lived their truth openly, running a successful ranch, raising a bilingual daughter, creating opportunities for others. Their most effective response to judgment had been quiet excellence. As if reading her thoughts, Ethan signed, "Mayor Thompson approached me after church yesterday. They want me to consider joining the town council next term." Olivia's eyebrows rose in surprise. From outcast to council member in 3 years was a remarkable transformation. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "That I'd discuss it with my wife," Ethan replied with a smile. "The meetings would require an interpreter. I think you should accept." Olivia signed decisively. "Your perspective is valuable, and it would continue what we started at Founders Day, showing that different doesn't mean less." The legacy of that confrontation had rippled through Willow Creek in unexpected ways. The new schoolhouse now included specific provisions for teaching children with various challenges. The church had designated a front pew for those who needed to see the minister's lips more clearly. Small accommodations had begun appearing throughout. A town, not from pity, but from recognition that community meant including everyone. From the nursery came a small cry. Elizabeth, likely woken by a dream, called for her parents. Both rose in unison, accustomed to sharing all aspects of parenthood equally. As they entered their daughter's room, Elizabeth raised her small hands, signing sleepily, "Bad dream." Ethan sat on the edge of her bed, while Olivia smoothed back the child's dark curls. Elizabeth's ability to communicate her needs in multiple ways, a fusion of her parents' worlds, struck Olivia anew as a profound gift rather than a compromise. "What was your dream about?" Ethan signed. People couldn't talk to each other, Elizabeth signed back, her expression serious. Nobody understood. Olivia and Ethan exchanged a glance over their daughter's head, a look that contained shared history, understanding, and gentle amusement at the irony of her fear. That is scary, Olivia acknowledged, but remember what we always tell you. Elizabeth's hands formed the familiar response. Real listening happens with more than ears, and real speaking with more than voice, Ethan added, completing their family mantra. As Elizabeth drifted back to sleep between them, Olivia contemplated the journey that had led to this moment, from a mail-order bride rejected for being too quiet to a woman who had found strength in silence and voice in understanding. From a deaf rancher isolated by others' limitations to a respected community member whose differences were increasingly seen as valuable perspectives. Their love story hadn't followed any conventional path. It had been written in the spaces between words, in gestures visible and invisible, in challenges overcome together. What Walter Simmons and others had seen as insurmountable barriers had become the very foundation of their extraordinary connection. Outside, their window, the vast Montana sky stretched endlessly above their expanding ranch, a fitting backdrop for two people who had refused to accept the boundaries others tried to place around them. In finding each other, they hadn't merely overcome their individual limitations. They had redefined what it meant to truly communicate, proving that sometimes the deepest connections form not despite our differences, but because of them. The newly constructed Willow Creek Town Hall gleamed in the summer sunshine, its fresh paint and polished windows a testament to the prosperity that had transformed the once humble frontier settlement into a thriving community. Flags and bunting decorated the building for the day's momentous occasion, the 10th anniversary of the railroad's arrival, and the official incorporation of Willow Creek as a proper city. Olivia James adjusted the collar of 12-year-old Elizabeth's dress as they waited outside the hall. At 38, Olivia's golden brown hair now contained threads of silver at the temples, but her posture remained straight, her eyes clear and observant as ever. Beside her, 9-year-old Thomas James fidgeted impatiently, his father's hazel eyes scanning the growing crowd for friends. "Stand still, young man," Olivia said in her seldom-used voice, strengthened by years of carefully practiced exercises, but still carrying its distinctive raspy quality. Thomas signed his response with the fluid speed of a native signer. "But Pa's going to speak soon. I want to get a good spot. Your father won't start without us," Elizabeth signed back, her movements elegant and precise, reflecting both her mother's refinement and her father's meticulous nature. A decade of marriage had brought Olivia not just these two remarkable children, but a life richer than anything she could have imagined when she first stepped off the train in Willow Creek. Their ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the region, known for innovative breeding techniques and sustainable grazing practices that other ranchers traveled miles to observe. The seamstress school had evolved into the James Institute for Practical Arts, a respected vocational school for young women that taught not only sewing and design, but also business management, basic accounting, and communication skills. Graduates from the institute could be found running successful businesses throughout Montana Territory and beyond. Mrs. James, a cheerful voice called from across the street. Rebecca Simmons, now Rebecca Mitchell after her marriage to the railroad station master's son, hurried toward them, her own young daughter in tow. At 28, Rebecca had become one of the Institute's most successful graduates, running a thriving dressmaking shop in Helena that specialized in adaptive clothing for people with various physical challenges. "I wouldn't have missed this for anything," Rebecca said, embracing Olivia warmly. "Father sends his regards as well." This news surprised Olivia. Walter Simmons had indeed moved to Denver years ago, his relationship with his daughter strained. by her choice to study under the woman he had once rejected and ridiculed. That he would acknowledge today's ceremony, even indirectly, suggested a softening in his rigid worldview. Rebecca switched to signing as she addressed all three Jameses. "He's following the newspaper reports about Father's appointment. I think he's finally beginning to understand." Ethan's appointment to the Montana Territorial Commission on Education had sent ripples throughout the region. Never before had a deaf man held such a position of authority. His mandate to develop standards ensuring all children, regardless of physical or sensory challenges, received appropriate education. The appointment had come after years of steady community involvement. Ethan had indeed joined the Willow Creek Town Council 8 years ago, with Olivia serving as his interpreter. His practical wisdom and innovative problem-solving gradually won over even his staunchest critics. When the territorial governor visited Willow Creek 2 years ago and witnessed the thriving community where signed and spoken language coexisted seamlessly, he had been inspired to create the new commission. The town hall doors opened, and people began filing inside. The James family made their way to the front row, reserved for the speakers and their families. Thomas bounced excitedly on his toes, while Elizabeth maintained the dignified composure that sometimes made her seem older than her 12 years. The interior of the hall hummed with conversation as townsfolk found their seats. Many exchanged greetings with the James family in sign, a language that had spread throughout Willow Creek over the years, taught in the school and used in many businesses. What had once marked Ethan and Olivia as outsiders had transformed into a community asset, bridging communication gaps in noisy sawmills, across ranch pastures, and during the church socials where music often drowned out spoken words. Mayor Thompson, now in his 60s, with a full head of white hair, took the podium. He had been one of the first town officials to learn basic signs, recognizing their practical value beyond accommodating a single deaf resident. "Welcome, citizens of Willow Creek," he began, his hands simultaneously forming the signs, a practice now common in all official town functions. "Today we celebrate not just our official incorporation as a city, but the spirit that has defined our community's growth." Olivia felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Martha Blackwood, now approaching 80, but still sharp as ever. The former boarding house owner had sold her business 5 years ago, but remained an active community member and honorary grandmother to the James children. "He looks handsome up there," Martha whispered, nodding toward the side of the stage where Ethan waited with the other speakers. At 45, Ethan James cut an impressive figure. His once brown hair now showed distinguished gray at the temples, and years of ranch work had weathered his face, but his posture remained straight, his gaze confident. The awkward isolation that had once surrounded him like an invisible barrier had long since dissolved, replaced by the assured presence of a man who knew his worth and contribution. He caught Olivia's eye across the room and signed quickly. Nervous, she signed back. "You'll be wonderful." Just like always, their exchange, brief but intimate, reflected the deep connection that had only strengthened over their years together. They had developed a private language within the language of signs, shorthand expressions and inside references, that communicated volumes in a single gesture. After the mayor's introduction and a speech from the railroad representative, Ethan took the podium. The hall fell silent, a gesture of respect rather than necessity, as he would be signing his speech while Professor Lawrence Miller from the Territorial College provided voice interpretation. 10 years ago, Ethan began, his signs clear and measured. Many believed Willow Creek would remain a small frontier outpost, unchanging and isolated. Some saw this as preservation of tradition. Others recognized it as stagnation, Professor Miller's voice carried Ethan's words throughout the hall as he continued. The arrival of the railroad brought physical connection to the wider world, but the true transformation of Willow Creek came from another kind of connection, the recognition that diversity of experience strengthens rather than weakens a community. From her seat in the front row, Olivia felt a surge of pride. The man before them spoke with the confidence of someone who had found his voice in a world that had once tried to silence him. The audience, many of whom had initially dismissed him as the deaf rancher, now leaned forward, captivated by his insights. "My journey in Willow Creek began in isolation," Ethan signed. "Like many who are different, I existed at the margins of community life, not through active rejection, but through the passive barriers of misunderstanding." He paused, his gaze finding Olivia's. Then a mail-order bride arrived, rejected for being too quiet. In finding each other, we discovered that our so-called limitations were actually foundations for a deeper understanding. The hall remained silent as Ethan recounted their story, not as a personal anecdote, but as a metaphor for the community's evolution. He spoke of initial resistance, the confrontation at Founders' Day, and the gradual shift as practical solutions replaced prejudice. "Today, Willow Creek stands as a model for inclusive community development," he continued. "Our school teaches all children, regardless of their hearing, speaking, or physical capabilities. Our businesses employ communication methods that enhance efficiency for everyone. Our public events ensure all citizens can participate fully." Thomas leaned against Olivia's side, watching his father with undisguised admiration. Unlike his sister, Thomas had been born deaf, a discovery that had momentarily stunned the doctor but caused no distress to Ethan and Olivia. They had simply added another dimension to their bilingual household, ensuring both children grew up fluent in signed and spoken language. "The territorial commission I now serve on will use Willow Creek's experience to develop guidelines for schools throughout Montana," Ethan signed. "Not as special accommodation, but as recognition that human diversity requires diverse approaches to communication and education." As Ethan's speech concluded to enthusiastic applause, both hand-waved and conventional, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The mail-order bride arrangement that had originally brought her west had failed in its intended purpose, but succeeded beyond imagination in an entirely different way. After the ceremony, the town, square filled with celebrants enjoying the community picnic. Tables groaned with food, a band played on the gazebo platform, and children raced through the summer green grass. The James family moved through the crowd, greeting friends and accepting congratulations on Ethan's speech. "Mrs. James," called, a voice Olivia hadn't heard in many years. She turned to find an elderly man with a cane making his way toward her, Jonathan Harrington, her father's friend who had tracked her to Willow Creek all those years ago. "Mr. Harrington," she exclaimed, genuinely pleased. What a surprise! The Boston businessman had maintained occasional correspondence with Olivia over the years, but she hadn't expected him to travel so far at his advanced age. "I wouldn't have missed this," he said, his eyes twinkling. "When I read about Ethan's appointment in the Boston papers, I knew I had to see for myself what you two have accomplished here." He glanced around at the integrated community where signed conversation occurred, alongside spoken dialogue, where the James children moved effortlessly between these worlds, where differences had become ordinary rather than exceptional. "I owe you an apology," Jonathan said soberly. "When I came to bring you back to Boston, I couldn't imagine this was possible. I thought you were sacrificing yourself to isolation." Olivia smiled gently. "You wanted what you thought was best for me. But I had found something precious here. The freedom to define myself beyond my limitations." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "I see that now," And not just for you and Ethan, but for this entire community. You've created something remarkable. As the afternoon progressed, Olivia found herself drawn to the quieter edges of the celebration. She watched Thomas playing an elaborate game with other children, some deaf, some hearing, all communicating through a mixture of signs, words, and the universal language of play. Nearby, Elizabeth sat with a group of her friends from school, their hands flying in conversation, despite the fact that all could hear perfectly well. They had grown up with signing as a natural part of their world and used it instinctively when talking became impractical due to distance or noise. Ethan found her there, offering a glass of lemonade as he sat beside her on a bench beneath an oak tree. "Proud of you today," she signed, her fingers expressing what words alone could not convey. "Proud of us," he corrected. "Everything here grew from what we built together." Olivia watched a newcomer to town, a young woman with a visible limb difference, being warmly welcomed into a circle of institute graduates. The woman's face reflected surprise and relief at the matter-of-fact inclusion. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Olivia signed. "If Walter had accepted me that first day at the station." Ethan's expression turned thoughtful. "Sometimes. But then I remember what you taught me, that rejection often redirects us to where we truly belong." The wisdom in his observation struck Olivia anew. Walter's rejection had seemed devastating at the time, but it had set in motion a journey that transformed not just her life, but an entire community's understanding of difference and capability. As the sun began its slow descent toward the western mountains, casting golden light across the celebration, Ethan touched Olivia's hand to draw her attention to the far side of the square. There, unnoticed by most in the crowd, stood an elderly man watching the proceedings with undisguised curiosity. Walter Simmons, coming back to Willow Creek after all these years. He caught their gaze, hesitated, then inclined his head in a gesture that fell somewhere between acknowledgement and apology. Ethan, without hesitation, returned the nod with dignified grace. Olivia added a small smile, recognizing in Walter's presence a completion of the circle that had begun at the train station 15 years ago. The former merchant didn't approach them, but continued observing the community that had evolved in his absence, a living testament to possibilities he had once dismissed. After a few minutes, he turned and walked slowly toward the new hotel on Main Street, his back straight despite his advanced years. "Not everyone can change their perception," Ethan signed as they watched Walter's departure. "But we can change what they perceive," Olivia replied, gesturing toward the thriving, integrated celebration around them. "Reality speaks louder than prejudice, given enough time." As twilight deepened into evening, lanterns were lit around the square. The Dawsons, Thomas now married with children of his own, Eleanor still spry despite her 70 years, joined the James family for the traditional dance that concluded every Willow Creek celebration. When the fiddler struck up a waltz, Ethan extended his hand to Olivia just as he had at their first Founders' Day. She took it with the same certainty she had felt then, though now their movements were smoothed by years of dancing together, anticipating each other's rhythm without thought. Their children joined the dance, Elizabeth with the banker's grandson, Thomas with Rebecca Mitchell's daughter, all of them moving to music that some could hear and others could only feel through vibration and visual cues. Around them, the citizens of Willow Creek danced together in various combinations, the differences between them no longer barriers, but simply variations in the human experience. As Ethan guided her through a turn, Olivia caught sight of their reflection in the town hall windows, no longer the anxious mail-order bride and isolated deaf rancher, but partners who had built something extraordinary from rejection and limitation. They had arrived at this moment not by denying their differences, but by embracing them, not by overcoming silence, but by discovering its value. The sky above Willow Creek filled with stars as the celebration continued into the night, each point of light distinct yet part of the same vast pattern. In the square below, a community celebrated not just its official recognition as a city, but its evolution into a place where communication flowed in multiple forms, where capability was recognized in diverse expressions, and where two people once defined by what they lacked had redefined what it meant to be complete. In the end, the mail-order bride rejected for being too quiet, and the deaf rancher who saw beauty in her silence had created not just a marriage or a family, but a legacy of understanding that would echo far beyond Montana territory, a testament to the unexpected gifts that come when rejection leads us not to bitterness, but to the place where we truly belong. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.